What's your guilty pleasure rom-com? And since you just mentioned you're also into rom-coms and ice
27
cream.
dresses, 27 dresses with a Belgian dark chocolate box. This has been something that I have done for my entire life.
Parth, what does love mean to you?
I have a cheesy answer, very, very cheesy answer.
Welcome to Sher Dili, a space for questions, not answers.
where we have dil far ke conversations around culture, art, mental health, and everything in between.
We're your hosts, Shagun.
Sanya and Sanjana.
Hello, welcome to season 2, episode 4 of Sher Dili. Today we're going to be talking about love as an agent of change, and we have Parth on board with us as our guest. Before we go on to introducing Parth, we'd like to say that modern love is more than just romantic love, and there is so much that comes under this. As Sher Dili, we believe that love is so big it has the capacity to change the world, and that's what we're here to talk to Parth about. Parth is a decolonial researcher, a liberation therapist, and culture worker. As a queer, non-binary, mad disruptor, their work can be best described as a nightmare for the status quo. Love that. Love that. But Parth, पहले हमें आप ये बताओ कि liberation therapist का मतलब क्या होता है?
Okay.
Please.
Gotcha. Good start for this. So, the idea with liberation therapists is that we have been brought up to understand mental health as a very Western colonial project. That we understand psychiatry as something that comes in from the West. There's a clinical, biomedical, very pathological understanding of mental health, which is all illness focused. That means that there's something wrong in your brain chemistry, and therefore you must be medicated, therefore you need to go to therapy, and so on and so forth. So, when people become clinical psychologists and they become like they get their licensure and they start practicing, they're trained within this Western colonial paradigm of we have the power to diagnose and therefore pathologize someone's experiences. And it's such a reductionist perspective, no, कि एक ही तरह का experience ko they're trying to promote and say that this is the one thing that we believe in and that's the only thing that's possible. The idea of liberation therapists and liberation therapy comes from just the fact that people go beyond the clinical biomedical model. That people who have lived experience, people who are from oppressed spaces. Now, a lot of us who come in with lived experience of mental health are with multiple marginalized identities. When we become therapists ourselves, are we the same people who are diagnosing, pathologizing, or getting assimilated into the system? Or are we doing something new? So the idea of liberation therapy came in from, no, we're looking at care as a model of liberation, care as a model of resistance. So we're no longer going to pathologize someone's identity, gender, experience, sexuality, love, resistance, or rage, but we're actually going to see how we can build systems in opposition to those which are already there. So there goes the nightmare to the status quo, kind of seeps into that space to understand that as liberation therapists, we're going to work in resistance to the colonial model of psychiatry, not in conjunction with it. Yeah.
I have a few questions coming up for me already. I love it. But सबसे पहले, I think, let's start with the basic. Parth, what does love mean to you?
It's basic, and that's like one of the most difficult questions to answer. I think to me, I would start by saying that love is like a political commitment. And this goes beyond like specifically in the times that we are in right now, right? Where it is so commodified, it is so fetishized on what love needs to mean is that idea of two people together and that's about it, like individuals, and it's limited to this just a pair or a couple. To me, love is like a political commitment to change. Like a lot of people ask questions on what is your love language, and you want to go back to a lot of those things which are, from again Western ideas which are being bought, Western ideas which are being sold out, and commodities that I like giving gifts or I like having time. That's such a reductive idea of what love means. To me, love means like, okay, how can we join our forces together and oppose systems which are oppressive? And how can we make a political commitment to honor each other in this moment, understanding that the world is on fire? And that we have the power between us, either as a community, either as people, or either as systems to oppose that. So then their love to me would mean like a political commitment that honors that kind of rage and honors that kind of resistance.
That also sounds amazing. It just made me go all Because I also think that as we're all trying to decode the definition of love, and then it's bringing me back to the book by Bell Hooks that talks about love as being the agent of change. Um, how does love look like in your workspace? Like when we talk about all these big terms that you use that are very, very real and most of us understand, but if you were to like simplify it further, how does love show up in your day-to-day work uh, space?
That's a lovely question. I'm glad that you already brought bell hooks into this, because that's the idea of, what does, we think of love as like an abstract idea, but it doesn't need to be an abstraction at all. We perform love every single day. It's like a practice that is there, right? It is rooted in the way that we show up for each other. Like the very fact that when as a community, as young people who are interested in mental health, even check in with each other when we are not working, right? When it's not rooted in that understanding of, oh, we need to only connect with each other when we have to bring out an output in the world. We still connect with each other, even if we might not have a lot of commonalities, just to check in on what's going on. That culture of, I am not here, I'm a villager in the larger village, and I'm checking in with other villagers is an act of love. It also shows up in the way that we work with our clients, in the way that we're building activism spaces that see, why are we doing any of this? The idea is because we know that all of us need a sense of belongingness. It's not to say that, okay, none of us can be alone or we can't have our own solitude, but it's to say that when I show up in a non-for-profit or I show up in a community space or I show up in a meeting, which is to discuss an advocacy tool or to build up a toolkit for people with young people with mental health, is to show that we all share that love within us for the work that we're doing, for each other's identity, and at the same time for the larger idea of the world changing to be a better place, right? Because when we talk about love, a lot of the times it can feel like an abstraction. But to people who are co-developing, co-designing resources together, like imagine making a magazine, imagine doing this podcast. We are not coming in with, okay, love is an abstract idea. We're coming in with, we know that this adds some good value to the world, which is not what the social capital will talk to you about, right? This is not something which is commodified and sold or repurposed and packaged. This is something that we're sharing as an experience which is born out of our love for the world that could be and the world that is right now. So like that way, love keeps showing up. I think a lot of the times in activism spaces, the fact that radical care is present, right? We understand the ethics of care on what capacity is, centering lived experience for people who are with multiple marginalizations, who require care, and even being that vulnerable and asking for care. The fact that I know people can rely on me and say, today is not the day that I'm working. Here's a care menu. Can you help me out with these things? What do you have capacity for? Or when I am completely at the rock bottom, day has gone really bad, chronic illness is chronic illnessing in the body really well that day, I reach out to someone and say that, yeah, this is where I need support. And that support being reciprocated is an act of care and act of love. So, so it sort of comes and shows up in these different contexts, which is not commodified, which is not abstract. It's a very real phenomena. The fact that we see people in protest together, they're present when they know that their safety is at risk, when their identity is at risk, is that act of care. So there's so many different ways that love shows up in this entire, workspace, and also just our way of being. Like we do the work that we do, but this is the way that we are, like just as people, right? Like activism as a being, our love shows up in all of these spaces as well.
Would you like to share a little bit about yourself? Just like introduce yourself, maybe where you come from and what your story is like, whatever's coming up for you, whatever you're comfortable sharing. I think that would give a lot of context.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If you're comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, I think, is a good point of the fact that even that check-in, right, is present here. I think for me, as when I talk about lived experience and I talk about chronic illness a lot, I'm someone with multiple disabilities, visual disabilities, and partially I have visual impairment in both eyes. So I've sort of been operating the world as someone with visual impairment. So there's already a space which is very difficult. And then on top of that, you add chronic fatigue, you add a psychosocial disabilities. The whole idea of that is still the language around that is very difficult to see. But again, when you come up with complex trauma, now I'm someone who would be codified in a book somewhere as CPTSD, depression and whatnot. But when you're growing up as queer non-binary, growing up with that idea of fatigue, which is not just mental, physical, but also with risk on your own health. And that has led to now different chronic illnesses in my own body, autoimmune, God knows what not. So when you're living life every single day, knowing that the systems around you are constantly exhausting your body and your mind, you sort of learn to see, what does this mean to me? What does it mean to me to be alive? What does it mean for me to look forward to life and the world? And that's how you connect with people around you and say that, yeah, these are the people that I want to be around. That could be your chosen family, your actual family, friends, community. And then you find spaces and build those spaces for yourself as well. So that's where I say that when I enter and exit community spaces, a lot of the time it's because of chronic care. It's because where the body just doesn't work. The spaces are just not accessible, So at the end of the day, you rely on others in your community for that kind of care as well. So this is the context that brings me to these ideas.
I think something that's coming up for me, like I really resonate with all that you're saying. But a very real question kind of pops up as somebody who's also trying to build her own startup and also center lived experiences, also try to do meaningful mental health work, something that speaks to me and aligns with the values that you spoke about. How do you sustain yourself? Like, how do you sustain a living, or how do you, like, at what point? I don't know. Like, that's what's coming up for me. That how do you kind of
Very
create?
real query.
Yeah. Do you have?
I'll tell you,
something
and I'll
to say?
contextualize a little bit about my work for that, just to show on what that looks like. So I like Sanil, you and I have had these conversations when I was just starting the foundation and the idea of what the foundation needed to look like, which has changed dramatically over that time. But I also wanted to start out with like a young person wanting to center lived experience, wanting to create that non-for-profit system where we're able to get people. And then those ideas shattered immediately. We wrote grants after grants after grants, tried to do these things which were more radical, liberatory, but was still controlled within that system of what was possible in that ecosystem, right? And then like to provide pro bono support and whatnot, and all of that crumbled really quickly. And over that time, I started realizing that to me, what does it mean to have sustainability in my context? Not sustainability which the West demands as impact driven by research or funding, or again, financial sustainability, which is you need to be earning a certain profit out of your own work that you're doing with your own identities. That's definitely possible. But that internal retrospection is very important to see where do I lie. All of that now, 3 years later, for me starting practice also is there is a 9 to 5 that I do, which is how I sustain myself financially, which is where I get money to pay rent and bills from. And then I have my own foundation where I'm doing pro bono practice over the weekend. So that's completely free of cost. That is for people from the community that can't access these resources, and then who don't have the funds to be able to pay a professional to get support, and who require support in the way that I provide in terms of the more liberation, resistance related work, right? So this is different from what is already present. And then the foundation does a lot more work, which is with volunteers. Something which I always believe in is that 10 hours a month, which was a rule which still stands for even me, that we're all doing like any sort of activism, any sort of work to even be to even be activated here today is a privilege that we all have because of our social locations, right? We're all here and have capacity enough to be activated and be here and talk about these things. But that's not the truth for a lot of people. So for me, when I think of sustainability, I think of, okay, do I want to play into that idea of writing grant after grant to get money after money, or to use like the therapeutic space to build up a practice and make that a revenue sharing model? To me, sustainability is not about the revenue. It is about longevity of how am I maintaining these relationships with the people that I know and I'm building the community around. Now that too, just when you say that out loud, you're like, okay, but then how do you earn? How do you live? That's a very real concern, which is why I had to resort to like a 9 to 5 and do consultations and do stuff. But the way that I define it is you create a moral, ethical, and legal framework for your own self on where you want to operate out of, How do you define your ethics? For me, my ethics would be whenever I work with a non-for-profit or a community in India, I don't charge money. It's just an understanding that, okay, if you're doing it specifically with companies and workspaces which are from, again, rural areas or marginalized areas, we're going to do a wealth redistribution. Where if you're inviting me for something, I'm going to help you raise funds for that event rather than asking for money. That would not hold true for companies which are Western. Which companies which are Western, there's a big bill that I send them and an invoice after my consultation saying, so this is for my services, and I demand equitable representation for remuneration because I know they have the funding for that. But a lot of our ecosystem doesn't have that. So I ensure that, where is the wealth redistribution happening from? So part of my work also happens on I earn, and then what is there can be redistributed to humanitarian campaigns, to mutual aid, and so on and so forth. So even with the practice, some people come in saying that I don't feel comfortable not paying you at all because the idea of pro bono is still new to people who need support. So then I say, okay, how much do you want to pay and what can you pay? So there are some people who pay $150. That $150 after 10 sessions or 5 sessions goes to a mutual aid campaign that they choose. Or someone comes in and says that, okay, I think I can't pay right now, but in the month where I'll have extra money, I can pay 5K or 10K. So the idea is, okay, you put that money. If you're not able to do activism on your own, because again, to be activated is to have privilege, is to say that how can we redirect that funds So that's how we have been able to fund a lot of families in Gaza that we've been working with for the last 2 years. That's how we've been able to fund quite a lot of education for Dalit Adivasi children in Madhya Pradesh, specifically in like different rural areas, where we're able to buy stationery directly. So it's not to say that this is again, a wealth redistribution model which will not work if I didn't have a 9 to 5 that sustained. So it does add undue pressure to always be on, which is something which we've discussed, how we are always on and we are always, it doesn't stop. Like the rest doesn't rarely comes in organically, but that's the idea. So the recommendation that I will give you also is to come up with your own ethical code of what do you want to do, which are the more public facing, community oriented, lived experience led projects that you have, that you want to center at making accessible, that you want to make it for everyone. And then unabashedly, what are revenue generating things that you require? I keep telling people that I operate from an anti-capitalist lens, and they go like, seriously, but you work and you earn and you're sitting on this Mac and you're talking to us, and how does that make any kind of sense? And to me is that anti-capitalism by definition would be an approach that you're taking to go towards more ethical standards of consumption. So my organization will not be like the millions that have come before that are exploiting the people working there or themselves to be able to generate a revenue. So that stance alone shows you where you can go towards ethical consumption, right? So it's sort of that philosophy of abolition is a practice, not like an event or an outcome that you're waiting for. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
I just want to say there's so much love. Like there's so much love in what you're saying.
Yeah.
I get very excited about stuff like this.
No, and it honestly gave me a lot of perspective and a lot of validation in a lot of ways, twisted ways. But a lot of love is showing up for me, and we're talking about modern love. And
I feel like along with a lot of love, there's also a lot of courage that goes into like sustaining yourself and like creating that space for yourself in a world that's actively trying to get you to function in a way that profits itself. And what's coming up for me and what was coming up for me, Parth, while you were telling us about all of this is it's so easy to feel like the world is broken and overwhelming. How do you keep coming back to love and refueling yourself? Like, what keeps you going? Because I'm very nice
Easy answer I have.
lie on my floor and be like, I'd like to sleep for a while now.
I have a cheesy answer, very, very cheesy answer. The idea would be, I don't think I run out of love to give. And that's I think one thing I'll say here is that I don't think I'm out of fuel in that aspect, For me, when I think of these systems and I think of the world is overwhelming, that's granted. The world is burning and is on fire in the way that we view it. And a lot of the way that our work functions is either a catalyst to the change that is coming in or an upholding the same systems that have been oppressive for the longest time. So the way that I view the work that I do and the love that comes in and the energy and excitement that comes into these spaces is that it's because you're building towards something different, right? These things will get sustained beyond us, beyond our lifetimes, beyond our systems. These struggles aren't ending today. Bell Hooks was writing this long back. All of Aries, people, Audre Lorde, Arundhati Roy, they've been writing this for a long time. When we think of love and its place in the political movement, it'll happen after us as well. So the idea is to know that there is no linearity to the work that we're doing, right? Wherever we are placed, we're able to show up and resist the systems with care, with love. So in the moment there, you have an opportunity to do something is to be courageous and hold that space for yourself if you have the privilege to be activated. So that is to me that idea of love being a practice more than a performance, that, you're practicing actively what you want to do. So the way that I get overwhelmed, enraged, and I think rage and love for me are very, very close. I call it the rage manifesto, which is that every time I show up somewhere, I come up with my rage manifesto, which is, okay, this is what enrages me. And this is how we're going to direct this rage towards something new. And something more a new perspective, an abolitionist perspective or something of that sort. So to me, those things go hand in hand, that when you think of the burning system and the burning world, you want to resist it and make it a better place. Knowing very well that you will not be able to make that change within your lifetime. But even if you change a millimeter of a perspective, or even if you change just the community around you in the most smallest way possible, where they think differently, they do something differently, they become the part of the village where you want to live, right? As a villager, you need a village to raise your family, to educate yourself, to build and sustain resources. Even if that happens, that purpose has been achieved. So we're already building a culture around love. In the world that is so loveless, and I think this is the Bell Hooks quote that I remember, in the world that despite the overwhelming pressures to remain loveless, in the world where we choose to seek love, is that action of resistance in itself, right? So I think that's where I show up. Do I have moments where I'm not present at all, where it gets very overwhelming? Yeah. That's where you rely on your community and say, yeah, you need someone else to pick you up and take you there and say that, yeah, we're doing this for a cause. Yeah. So I don't think I ran out of love on a lot of those days.
I never
think-
thought. Okay, sorry, go on.
No, Sanya, please go on.
There's just this one thing that I'm actually feeling emo right now, and we've had like conversations around like romantic love and around relationships, and I was not as emo there. But Abhi, from all that you shared, I'm like, I don't know, like I'm feeling emotional, I'm feeling moved. That's what I wanted to say. But yes, Shagun.
I think love and rage are really intertwined, and I mean, I personally feel like rage and anger is an emotion that can be channelized really well. I mean, for me personally, it's a very familiar emotion because I've always used it in a way that it just keeps you going. So I completely understand that. But there are also often times when like you did say, to be activated is also a privilege, but sometimes there is also a disconnect from the rage and from the anger, and that kind of just keeps you in this bubble because you rely on your community, but you also need to be an active participant in creating that community. Like, I don't think
Absolutely.
communities are just there to be like, okay, I want to be a member or मैं हूँ और बस हम करेंगे. So what insight do you have on creating and sustaining a community that is ever growing and dynamic?
That's a very good question. I think the way I'll answer this is by let's discuss just why do we not have time to hold our like rage and just sit in our emotions. We keep using this therapy speak in our language of sit in the emotion and feel it. But let's talk about the reason why that doesn't happen. When you are just from our context, wherever we're living, when we're working the entire day, when you're already exhausted after the day, you come back and you have responsibilities for your loved ones, your family, you're already emotionally burnt out at the space that you're already working at, right? Because you're already doing too much there. There's a cost of living crisis. You're living in a community which is getting segregated again. There's a whole gentrification taking place. Rent is very high. You don't have resources to go to. Traffic takes a long time. And then you enter, and then everyone in your family is also having one of those days where no one has the time for rage. You don't have family systems which are communicative, specifically in the Indian context and the South Asian context. We don't have families. We have loud families in terms of the volume, but we don't have families which honor rage or understand, what does it mean to be angry or sad. A lot of the times that's brushed over as conflict, or you laugh over it, and it just goes on in the traditional idea of hierarchy, and then we move forward. So what you're left with at the end of the day is, where do I position my rage in it? When you think of love and that connection together or that belongingness, you want to go to places which are more commercial, which are more transactional. So you want to watch something on a show, you want to go on a dating app, you want to find love in a bar, you want to go somewhere else. None of this is wrong. None of this is wrong by a margin, but it limits your options to this being the only way you understand love and this being the only way that you understand community is transactional. That I need to go somewhere, buy something for it to be a community. That's not true though, right? When we talk about like love as an act of change, an agent of change, we're also looking at building communities and sustaining communities. To make the village, you need to be an active villager, right? You just show up in places where there is conflict. In communities, there's a lot of conflict. How do you navigate that conflict? How do you hold yourself accountable? How do you make time for these spaces which are for liberation, for resistance, for care, right? How do you actively go there? So when they join run clubs, when people join a book club, when people join an emotional support circle, when people connect for art, when people go to kitchens together, people are creating stuff, and people go to walk their dogs in the park, people are coming together, people are walking down the street. Cultures are built around wanting to do something and actually being able to do it. A lot of people are with people with multiple disabilities who can't do that. So then you find disability affirmative spaces of community which may be digital. What does it mean to build a digital community? What does it mean to learn and to access these resources, So I also often think about, sometimes we put ourselves down on, there's like, even when we talk about love, and Sanya was just talking about like that romanticized idea of love also, is that we also think of it and limit it to, that just happens on a few apps that you rotate through, one possible connection here or there, depends on whether you're not straight or not, and that limits your options, and that's about it. But the whole idea of community is that you can find love between two people within the community. or between a group within the community as well when you act upon it, when there are people with like-minded values who are creating those spaces. And sustainability, again, here looks like that whole idea of, what is sustainable to you? The fact that there is even a community to engage with is sustainable in its own way. That tomorrow when you need support, can you go there? Tomorrow when you need to have fun, can you go there? And is it not transactional? It's reciprocal. So that difference between transactional and reciprocity here comes into place. That, I'm not going in because I can take a credit card, go and be like, I can buy something from you, and therefore you're part of my community. It's to say that I show up with nothing, I still show up. And me showing up is that value that I'm providing there.
I feel like clapping. Is that weird?
You crazy child.
That's so much. Wow. I think I should have made notes, Parth. Like, I really. But thank you. No, I think this has been really insightful and also very thought provoking. More also in a way where it's lovely to have words to these feelings that are so that these feelings that are felt, but I don't think I've heard someone say out loud in conversation with me in a really long time. And I hope that this is also something that people who watch this video feel, and makes sense.
It's actually also bringing me back to, we'll also wrap up in a bit. We have a few questions for you. We have a rapid fire. But like also bringing me back to this whole idea of, we spoke in our last podcast as well about how love, this does not seem easy at all to do. Like, this is an active choice, and you said that
It's a practice.
it's a practice. You never run out of love. That's so I'm just like thinking out loud right now that it's not easy. And we talk about like radicals. I just want to understand, how do you kind of sustain and take care of yourself through all of this, like how do you love yourself or something on those lines, because this is not easy, and the fatigue that comes with it, and people who want to do similar kind of work, what would you want to say to them, and what is something you tell yourself, and how do you kind of show up for yourself?
I wish in my head right now, quite a lot of quotes are coming in from all my favorite authors just as responses for all of this. And I just want to, I'm going to take from that, but also build on what I was talking about. But there is this idea of, with like just going back to what Audre Lorde has also spoken about, like love, right, and care, is that care again becomes like an act of self-preservation and political warfare. On the days where I am overwhelmed, on the days where I'm feeling that, okay, this is what would be called a burnout, or this would be called fatigue, I'm out. I'm in my little isolation booth, overstimulated. I'm just decompressing, doing things that can bring joy to me in that particular moment. And I'm not available for a lot of people. That can be romantically, that can be in community, that can be at work. And that also requires a certain level of privilege, which I'm acknowledging, to be able to take that time away, right? But it comes from the idea that I'm preserving myself because I know it is not just about me. That the work that I'm doing is part of a larger movement in world building. And when we're doing world building work, our individual comforts are no longer important, but preservation is. So it's not to say that, okay, if I'm running out, I need to go take a long vacation somewhere on a beach or somewhere in the mountains and then come back and suddenly I have a lot more love to give. It's to say that in the world that constantly gives you, it's to say that in the world that constantly pushes you towards lovelessness, when you take time away to preserve yourself from that hurt, preserve yourself from that harm, because it's not always good, right? Even within community spaces, when you're doing something new of this sort, a lot of resistance and hesitation is what you're met with. And sometimes there is a lot of lateral harm that happens within these spaces of world building. So when you're hurt by these spaces and you require time for repair, taking that time for repair is an act of self-preservation. So that, to me, self-care, and we just had World Self-Care Day just a couple of days ago, is that idea of moving past that skincare mask on my face, I'm watching a rom-com with an ice cream bucket, because I do that till day. But it also goes on to, when do I limit myself from anything? When do I limit myself from pro bono work? When do I limit myself from volunteering at spaces? When do I limit world building for myself and others when I no longer have capacity. So that self-preservation sort of comes there. There's this another quote which is by this black playwright called Loren Hansbury, which I love using as an example to, again, because the way when I read it and when I felt so uncomfortable, I wanted to sit with that distress, and now I like talk about that quote with everyone. Is that, do I remain a revolutionary? Intellectually, yes. But am I able to give my body towards the movement? And then she says that comfort is its own corruption. That sometimes when we think of self-care, right? Oh, I'm not going to watch the news. Trust me, I had goosebumps all across my body when I first read that. Because that idea of self-care and comfort comes from, okay, I don't need to watch the news because I'm getting overwhelmed or my mental health is going to be bad. I don't want to watch dismembered children every day. I don't want to constantly be looking at sites of oppression. So let me take my eye away. But that privilege of comfort is its own corruption in the way that we have the choice to take our eye away. What happens when we give our body out, when we do push past that burnout in some instances when it is required to show up for a community member, right? Tomorrow, when your friend or when your community member is at a life or death situation, you're not thinking about, oh, but my mental health comes first, my privilege or my comfort comes first. You're doing everything in your power to be able to reach out and support, to provide support in whatever way possible. Their self-care doesn't come in. Their care is rooted in the community. So for me to be self-preserved and for me to have any opportunity for care, I need to show up in the community first. So, this is that idea of, okay, how are we preserving ourselves to be part of a world building movement, to be part of that, to use love as an agent of change sort of drives that idea. That it's not just about me doing it individually, but me individually part of a much larger community.
Deep breaths.
I love how you say world building. Like, wow. And
This is something new, right? It's like what we're already part of is so, like, again, the structures that we're already part of, none of us chose to be born into these systems or to work under those or train under those. So when we actively have choices, what does the world look like to all of us is so different, right? It's so decentered. It's not about us anymore. It's about a new ecosystem that could be anywhere from your own partner, yourself, your community to the actual world in whatever way possible. So that idea of world building. It's that idea of that,
I also know what Tapan is thinking right now. Sorry, just for some, like, I know where her mind is. And she's like, let me make the most conversation. But yes,
No, I
go ahead.
love that question. And this is something that, I was also wondering. And again, I also call myself like a sapling in this space, that there was already like barely any experiences. I mean, at 25, you don't have a lot of opportunity for experience. Even with these identity markers, with privilege, etc., you're limited by what world building means to you and resources mean to you, right? So when I think about a lot of this, to me is we make a commitment with ethical commitment to do stuff, but oftentimes you're looking outside, right? It's a lot of outward facing work that we want to reach these many people. These are the communities we want to build or work with. These are the people that we want to work with. Sometimes it's quite literally where we are placed. What happens when you look at community around you? So to see how ethics would work or what ethical framework would be in practice, I like to ask a lot of people, specifically straight men who want to create this idea of social enterprise and social impact, on what do you see as your role in your own family system? And that tends to trigger them quite a bit, and specifically young entrepreneurs, who I like to say that, okay, what do you think of chores? What do you think of doing the chores in your own family system? What do you think of work in your community? What do you think of going past that idea of bread earner to, okay, I am a resource provider to the community? And that answer and dialogue makes them crumble that ethical framework of impact and assessment, and we're going to earn money and build stuff. And they suddenly go like, okay, you mean immediately next door neighbor, what do you do with them? So for a lot of us in this space, it's that next door neighbor understanding that we think of communities as abstract ideas, but they're formed by people. We think of our ethics to be, again, abstract questions and thoughts and quotes and frameworks, but they're practiced with actual people in mind. So if you turn around and see in your actual neighborhood, if your work doesn't implement there, if your work doesn't implement or reach people who don't have access to a network, who don't have internet access, who don't have technology, what are we talking about? When you turn around, there's an old person sitting in a community somewhere, like under the community center where you sit. That old person doesn't have an understanding or vocabulary of mental health, but has influence in the family system. So when we're designing our mental health toolkits, etc., how do you include that person in mind? How do you include the various amount of faith leaders, spiritual practices, indigenous healing methods that are villainized but hold a lot of value to systems that we work with? So, how do we actually see our ethics in practice rather than them being abstract ideas? So my thought is always go to your next door neighbor and see what conversation would you have with them. How do you do conflict with the next door neighbor? Like the best example for that is in Indian settings is, okay, do you know your next door neighbor? Are they part of the community that you're building with? And what does conflict look like if you do know them? And how do you do repair there? Because that's a very good masterclass in doing this on a much larger scale and doing it with like the workspace that we're trying to build and sustain. Absolutely. Families are systems would like to put an asterisk next to, because for a lot of us, that's, that's tricky waters. That's why I go to the neighbor first. But yeah, if you have resources, if you have resources, definitely. First thing is always, you have the time to think about things differently. So if you can think about it differently, how many others can you facilitate that with as well? And just not to assume that others don't know. What you said is so poignant here, right? It's not that others don't have the language of the resources. It's just a different language and a different set of resources. So how do you do that bridge building for your neighbor, for your community, for your family, who may not have the language of liberation, abolition, and ethics and lived experience that we have today because of our access to tech that they might not have?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, thank you.
So just the line that, not ethics in thought, but ethics in practice. I think that's a very good way to look at it. And it's easier now for at least me to kind of make sense of it in my own work, at my own work. But should we go to the rapid fire round? Are you ready, Parth?
Oh, I'm scared. But yes, I'm excited.
All right. What is your most controversial opinion about love?
It needs to be limited between two people. It doesn't.
One red flag you're absolutely okay with.
Red flag in love or just in generally?
In love, in modern love, that you're absolutely okay with.
I am not okay with any red flags. I
Fair.
conflict. I invite conflict, but not okay with red flags.
What's your guilty pleasure rom-com? And since you just mentioned you're also into rom-coms and ice cream.
27 dresses with a Belgian dark chocolate box. This has been something that I have done for my entire life. It's 27 dresses, how to lose a guy in 10 days, and 10 things I hate about you. Bride Wars as an occasional feature if you want to add. Belgian chocolate tub to my lactose intolerant body with a spoon cuddled up with a face mask at the end of the day.
Love it, love it. Which movie couple has no business being together, according to you?
Any straight couple. Honestly, I'm done watching these movies with straight people getting together. Good for y'all. Don't need more of that. We can stop now.
Okay, fair. What's your ick that instantly kills the vibe? Like, what's your, this is not for me, that kills the vibe?
People who are not politically aware. Privileged.
If your love life was a song, what would it be?
That is such an interesting question. Oh my God, I have never thought about that. But it's What's Up by Four Non-Blondes.
Okay.
It's
Or would you like to sing a lyric or two, or
that's
tell
not,
us?
yeah. I charge a lot of money for that, for me singing on faces. But no, Four Non-Blondes, I think the whole idea is being young, getting high, and then overthrowing the system.
Fair enough. Sounds like you. One red flag about you.
Too political. Sometimes I need to chill. Sometimes I need to just be there. We're
I think
working
this is
on it.
going to be our teaser. Sometimes I need to chill.
Sometimes I need to chill, yeah.
Something everyone can relearn about love.
Its importance beyond the physical sexual intimacy, on what love looks like just in general. What do you do when you're not physical and intimate with another person? What would then love mean to you if you take away all of that? Oh, that was a lot.
Yeah.
So